because I love language. I have done since I was a tiny boy, and I love playing with language. And I think that poetry can be a really useful tool to get children, to get adults to just love language, to love its textures, its sounds, its colours, its flavours. I've written a book recently called Writing Autism about writing and autism, and one of the things I talk about is how I sit with language and taste it like synesthetically, and I love it. And so poetry is one of the ways in which it puts to the fore the kind of formal properties of language, and in a way a lot of the time you can dispense with worrying about what it means. You can just taste language, and of course children's literature is full of that, rhyming and alliteration. So this is Dylan Thomas. This is a frame that I made, and when I put it on this slide, I realized I am a woodworker, but I realized that it shows off the fact that creating 45-degree angles in frames is really quite difficult, so it's slightly wonky. But actually, I think it's also cropped, so it does go up. But the problem but I think it's in keeping with Dylan Thomas, who is a bit wobbly himself. So that's Dylan Thomas, smoking a fag. Anyway, so what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about poetry to start with. So I called it a ridiculously indulgent lecture, which is not really a lecture, which is about 10 minutes sort of, talking about language. And then we're going to have rhyme, rhythm, and then we're going to do some writing. So the first part really is to sort of just chuck out some terms that you might know. If you don't know them, it's fine. I gave you a handout so you can go and look up the words and ask me. But I'm pathologically playful with the way I teach, so you'll have to bear with me in the first part of this. So the first lines, learning to love language, don't worry too much about absorbing the phonetic alphabet. The first 3 lines of the title of my talk are, of course, alliterative. Alliteration? Yeah, we all comfortable with that? But at least to the I. Now, this is a distinction that I think a lot of us don't get. So there are 3 L letters: learning to love language, learning to love language. However, as you will know, as primary teachers, the phonics or phonetics or phonemes of the L sounds are actually subtly different. L, la, la. Yeah. So it is alliterative as an I rhyme, as it were, but technically it's not alliterative as a sort of consonant. But that's fine. But the I alliteration groups the words together, and so oftentimes we will say to kids or other people, look, it's L's. Why did they do this? Learning to love language. So the I alliteration groups the words together, while the phonemic trajectory, l, la, la. There's going to be a lot of this, by the way, so bear with me, okay? And I'm unembarrassed by doing this. I feel like I'm at the dentist. The I alliteration groups the words together, while the phonemic trajectory takes our mouths on a monophthongish meander. This is basically alliteration bingo now. So the phonemic trajectory takes our mouths on a monophthongish meander through the pursed l to open the vowel sound of la, which, pleasingly, is the same sound as laugh. Language, laugh, almost. So we are already primed by the devilish magic of my title, which, of course, I just made up as I was writing it, or phonetically finagled to feel happiness before we land on the word poetry. Learning to love language, like a laugh with poetry. What trickery is this? The other thing I often do, and I've written about this in my book as well, is like be really, really unfunny as a way to make people sort of on board. So if I'm really unfunny and the things are going, it's deliberate. The other way of doing it is being meta about it and pretending that you are funny. So Shakespeare knew the magically manipulative use of language. Who's read Macbeth? Remember Macbeth? Which they still trot out every year. Shakespeare knew the magically manipulative use of language when he had his 3 witches mesmerize the hapless Macbeth with their alliterative alliterative and devilish phrasal parallels. So the language was designed to be magical. That's why he had these usually triples. And reversals of their line, fair is foul and foul is fair. So Macbeth, that's one of the things they say. Macbeth, gullible, guileless, and guilt-ridden, doesn't realize he's already under their spell when he states in his first lines, so foul and fair a day have not I seen. So the first, they say fair is foul and foul is fair, in this kind of like magical way, which reverses everything, so they're witchy. Witches with beards, which is great. And then the first thing Macbeth says in the play is, so foul and fair a day I have not seen. So he's already under the spell of their witchy word magic. So, as you've already witnessed, I'm a pathological alliterator, and it is a pleasurable but somewhat peeving pastime of mine. This is irritating, I know. But I'm also a poet, so I give myself license to lovingly lounge in the pleasurable play with what is broadly described as phonemic or phonetic parallelism. So when you're lining up phonemes in a significant way, you're paralleling these things. This all leads into exercises, by the way. So this poetry session essentially is about linguistic play. And we can teach, and how we could possibly teach or bewitch children and young adults and others to learn to love the magic and power of poetry, as I do. So during I will read through this, so don't, I'll allude to this in a minute. I'm going to come to this, which was an amazing find. So during a recent lesson in which I was teaching a reticent and rather overconfidently ebullient 15-year-old about phonic parallelism or sound patterns, I asked him to create a 3-word phrase using alliteration. So, for example, in language, in the language paper in GCSE, I often, one of the things that they ask kids is, and sorry, I know you're primary educators, but is how does a writer use language to create effects? And so you often get them hunting for like alliteration, consonants, metaphors, and stuff like that. And they're like, oh yeah, they're trying to create the effect of X, Y, and Z. So instead of one of the things I often say is like, how would the phrase that the writer used change if you change the adjective? Like, what difference does that make? And also what I do is I get them to do their own inventions. So this student came up. So I asked him to create a 3-word phrase using alliteration. And I said to him, use my name to start with, I instructed, followed by a verb and an adverb. And so after explaining to him what an adverb was, he came up with the following. Gareth galloped gorillally, for some reason. Which I thought was delightful. Actually, and when I was putting this slide up, I don't really normally do slides, so I got carried away. I found a flute trio called Galloping Gorillas, which in the Google. He wasn't on there, but I couldn't resist him. So Fran Griffin, I haven't heard it, but I'm sure it's great. So she did Galloping Gorillas. I didn't realize that was a phrase, but my student came up with it. It's really creative, and he hates poetry. And I said, that's an amazing phrase, and I've used it, and I'm using it now. He's famous. So he is into horse riding, hence the gallop, which is a fine galumphing verb. So after laughing and admiring his creativity, laughing positively, of course, I pointed out that gorillally was not technically a word. I did, however, congratulate him for his use of the most common suffix "ly" to morphologically create a new adverb, a neologism. Everyone heard the word neologism? Neo meaning new, logism meaning language, a new coinage. So create a new adverb, a neologism from a noun. What I'm trying to do, I'm also being a bit meta here. What I'm doing is I'm teaching the student about grammar as well as alliteration while I'm getting him to be creative with language. And it's sort of like lessons by stealth. I'm not sure how much it goes in, but anyway. The phrase, I announced triumphantly, is a pretty perfect poem. And so I waited for the penny to plop, or for the recognition of my own alliteration to reverberate and register across his face. It did eventually, and it was delightful. a delicious moment of defiant creativity in an otherwise often dull, didactic dialogue. I was laughing when I was writing this, at how irritating I was. So, the one thing, before we move on, the one thing that, this thing, one times when we're often teaching poetry, have you ever had it where someone says, it's alliteration, and they say, oh God, it's got to have meaning. You know, like say, for example, with snakes, for example, the slithering snake slithered softly in a sound sausage or something like that. What we're invited to do, we often try and ascribe meaning to that. It's like, yeah, there's something about the S sound that creates, which is kind of true. But there is such a thing as what we know, what is known as, I think, although I might have made it up, phonesthetic fallacy. So a fallacy of attributing meaning to phonemes. So the question of whether alliteration adds anything to the meaning of the gorillally galloping Gareth, I mean, it kind of does, sort of, is a tricky one to broach. There is such a thing, as I say, as the phonesthetic fallacy, whereby people try to argue there's something inherently gorilla-like in the G repetition. In other words, that the repetition is phonetically aesthetic, like it has meaning. Like there's something. Is there? Well, I'll ask the question: is there something gorillally about this whole alliteration?
I think it's more gallopy than gorilla.
It is more gallopy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Gallop and gorilla like kind of don't go together.
I know. Yeah.
They're like opposite.
Yeah. So
It's like a gallopers, aren't they?
no.
They're like, oh.
Well, but apparently, according to Fran, they are. So, but
I don't think the name Gareth sounds like someone called Gareth.
well, you'd be surprised.
Gareth seems more like I wouldn't use gallop. Like, do you know what I mean?
Glided, glissaded.
Gallop? Yeah.
Gareth glided graciously,
Yeah.
gracefully.
Yeah. That's what Gareth.
In which case, right? Okay, that's really brilliant, right? This is my point about phonesthetics, right? Gareth galloped gorillally. Is the G sound in both of those alliterations? Does it have so Gareth galloped gorillally or Gareth glided gracefully? Does the G contribute to the meaning of the phrase?
It sounds softer.
But what about the gallop?
That makes it sound harsher, I think.
Ga.
Yeah.
What was it? Gl.
Yeah, it's the gluh.
Okay.
It
So
makes it sound more gentle.
yeah. Well, this is the thing, and so, but it's kind of nebulous, isn't it? And until you think about it, you sort of think, yeah, man, it sound. Hang on, what's it? Glided. Was it? But is the gr? Is that graceful sound?
I think it's softer.
It's softer than g.
Yes.
Gleefully, glided
Nice.
gleefully.
That's like happy.
So there's a debate you could have really about whether the prefix gl has something to do with gliding. Now, technically, of course, it doesn't because it's totally arbitrary, that sound. You know, there's no relationship between the movement and the sound itself. But we're tricked into believing somehow that it does have meaning or that it contributes to it. But that's a really great example of like how if you just change the sound and then think about does it contribute anything to the like, I don't know, meaning or aesthetics, it's kind of an interesting thing. And there's no real answer to it. And that's the other thing that of course frustrates kids when they're doing poetry and literature. But just tell me the meaning. Just tell me the meaning. And then we can move on. But here we're in this kind of nebulous realm. Anyway, so let's talk about some rhyme, and then I'm going to get you to do some rhymes. So I know this is boring, but they're here. So there's tons of sound patterns, and these are technically known as internal sound patterns, okay? And you can use all of them. So that's alliteration, which is the repeated consonant sounds, words near each other. Assonance, which is vowel sounds, which is really annoying, because that one's obvious. I always say to students, do you know what assonance is? No. Okay, it's repeated vowel sounds. Or has anyone seen Educating Rita, the film? it's getting the rhyme wrong, is what she says. So assonance is getting the rhyme wrong, but it's repeated vowel sounds. Consonance is repetition of consonant sign. Although I suppose it would be vowelants. Vowelants? Vowelants. Oftentimes, and you know that, I'm sure you know, like words are often, you know, so vowelants could have been the word, but because it's not a pleasing word, they came up with this assonance. I think ason, does anyone know the ason? It doesn't, anyway, it doesn't matter. It's got ass in it, which is quite funny, but but I suppose it's... Exactly, it starts with a vowel. It's the ass sounds. So assonance is the ass sounds. Consonant is consonant. Cacophony, which is very what Gerard Manley Hopkins is good at, as well as euphony, bringing these things together. So oftentimes in the Wreck of the Deutschland, which is a long poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins, he uses cacophony to illustrate the wreck of this ship, which was a ship that went down with a load of nuns in it, unfortunately. And he was, and an onomatopoeia. And onomatopoeia is like phonesthetic fallacy. Like onomatopoeia, people go, yeah, like bang is onomatopoeic. But there are very few words actually that do have oral effects apparently mimicking the image described, because as we know from Ferdinand de Saussure, the arbitrary nature of the sign. Yeah, does that make?
Come back to me now.
Yeah. Well, as in, there's no inherent cattiness about the sound cat. It's arbitrarily related. Yeah. Does that make sense? Like, as in, there's nothing, like if you look at a tree, there's nothing tree-like in those sounds. So there's it's the relationship between the sound and the thing is totally arbitrary. There's no motivation to it. It's just a sound that someone came up with. And onomatopoeia seems to kind of contradict that slightly. And in fact, Ferdinand de Saussure in his later and more interesting days, I think when he was going bonkers, like started sort of thinking about actually there is an arbitrary relationship. Words do have magical connections to things, which is quite cool actually. Anyway, so those are sound patterns, but then we have rhymes, like what are often called end rhymes, or types of rhymes. So many different types of rhymes that poets use in their work. So we've got the internal rhymes, last time, slant or half rhymes. So for example, hill or full. Parenthesis. I or sight rhymes, move and love. I/rhymes. Identical rhymes such as rhyme and rhyme, which is really boring. And you often get that in a lot of pop songs, like Taylor Swift. Although she doesn't use identical rhymes. One of the most common ways to write a rhyming poem is to use a rhyme scheme. Rhyme scheme? Does anyone know what a rhyme scheme is? ABAB, yeah, exactly that, or AABB. And some of the more complex poems have like ridiculous rhyme schemes where you have to go A, B, A, C, C, D, D, E, F, J, etc., etc. I do know my alphabet, but So a rhyme scheme is patterns of sounds that repeats the end of the line, e.g. a stanza. Rhyme schemes change line by line, stanza by stanza, or can continue throughout a poem. And rhyme schemes are often accompanied by traditional meter. Meter? Is everyone familiar with what meter is? Exactly. Yes. Yeah. So what is iambic pentameter?
5 sets of 2.
Brilliant. We've got a star pupil here. Yeah, exactly. Shakespeare. And Shakespeare, and so Shakespeare. But talking about rhymes, Shakespeare often wrote blank verse, which is iambic pentameter without a rhyme. And incidentally, in Shakespeare's plays, the heroes, heroines, the main characters speak in poetry. The working class characters speak in prose. You ever noticed that? They talk in. That's fair is foul and foul is fair, and then the guy comes in. Oh, all right, Macbeth, I'm like, and he hasn't got any like, and that's what they all sound like. I think they're changing that, nowadays. But if you look at a Shakespeare play written down, you've got the sort of kings and lords and like writing, blank verse and rhyming and all that, and they rhyme with each other, and also the iambic pentameter. You often see lines like that, so one person ends saying, one person ends saying. So they do like 5 syllables, and the next person does 5 syllables as well. But then the porter comes in, and he's like, yeah, well, I'm not going to use in prose, and etc. And then he speaks like that. So that's interesting. So poetry is often associated with high speech. So now we're gonna. This is where we're on to rhyme and some exercises we're gonna do. Right. So rhyming. I'm going to teach you a little bit about rhyming, which is, you know about ABAs anyway. But this is really interesting. Ballads are very, very common, and they're used very, very commonly throughout the history of poetry, and they're very, very versatile and useful. So if we can hear the rhymes, Emily Dickinson, probably one of the greatest poets, I think, that ever lived. Does anyone know Emily Dickinson? She was an American poet in the 19th century, very, very reclusive, wrote thousands of small poems. Also autistic, so it's great, she's a champion. Anyway, so because I could not stoop for death, because I could not stoop for death, he kindly stooped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality, which is a great use of that word. And then this comes out with Wordsworth. Well, Wordsworth was before, of course. A slumber did my spirit seal. I had no human fears. She seemed a thing that could not feel the touch of earthly years. So satisfying, those rhythms. And note the pause as well. Because I could not stoop for death, he kindly stopped for me. Pause. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. Now, oftentimes with iambic pentameter, oftentimes when I'm sitting down with students saying, oh yeah, Shakespeare writes in iambic pentameter, look, it's 10 syllables. And you actually then count the syllables and it's like 11 or 12 or 9. And you're like, yeah, well that must be a little bit of a variation. Because oftentimes there are variations. That's why Shakespeare uses contractions a lot. It's not just because he is being difficult. He uses contractions to kind of compress the line. So, but also our emphasis does go slightly different. Because I could not stop for death. That seems quite straightforward. Iambs. He kindly stopped for me. That's not quite. The carriage held but just ourselves. It's quite rhythmic, but there are variations. So what they call parsing, P-A-R-S-E, parsing meter, like as in identifying it, it's actually quite difficult. So just to kind of transcribe it in a kind of primitive way. Because I couldn't stoop for death, he kindly stopped for me. Pause. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. So it is primarily de-dum, de-dum. These are iambs. De-dum, 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 de-dum. De-dum, de-dum, de-dum. De-dum, 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 de-dum. De-dum, de-dum, de-dum. Which is like a really interesting rhythm. And you see it everywhere. And the reason you see it in... One of the devastating things that poets can do is they can use a ballad meter, which is often used in nursery rhymes, for really sad subjects. So you're kind of, it's a way of, it's like a vehicle for what would be an innocent childhood thing, and then it's all about death. That's why it's kind of quite an interesting thing. So again, a slumber did my spirit seal. I had no human fears. She seemed a thing that could not feel the touch of earthly years. A-B, A-B, A-B. Right, so what I want you to do is, I want you to write your own ballads try and be as precise as possible, but you don't need to necessarily make any sense. But what I would urge you to do, and I often do this, is choose your end rhymes first, and then write lines towards those.